Hello, everyone. This is Faheem Jackson, and it's episode 115 of my podcast show, In the Know. This podcast is aimed at trying to guide people through the world with a variety of topics. And I'm also using this platform to ask questions and try my best to answer these questions with viewpoints of the world around me. The following episode introduction speech is for the topic of today. And that introduction speech is regarding why religion gives man an afterlife and the meaning behind it. See, I've spoken about the issue with regards to the idea that religion in prior episodes is dying out. I have not really touched on the idea of the afterlife. And the reason I put together the idea of religion dying in the afterlife is because even people who don't believe in God have a faith base around life after death. That sounds odd that they'll even go as far as saying that they are spiritual beings, not religious, because religion is tough for people since there is a controlling aspect to what religion is: the structure, the discipline, the rules, and the force. Spirituality gives you some type of leeway, but an afterlife belief is both religious and spiritual. But let's not get too deep into people and their belief systems. Let's focus on the topic at hand, which is the afterlife. What is it? Does it really exist? Where does the soul go off to? Are we in control of ourselves? Do we meet loved ones after we die? Who's in charge after we die? What is the scientific proof of the afterlife and how to deal with the idea that there may not be an afterlife? So let's first start out by saying, what is the afterlife? This is the point in time in which the person dies and transitions on. We typically go to heaven after we die, is the held belief. Yet the belief is that we could potentially turn into an animal. Now that is something that we don't want to happen. Can you imagine turning into a chicken or a cow? See, we would love to think that we turn into an American eagle, a lion, an alligator, crocodile, rattlesnake, tiger, grizzly bear, gorilla, and a cheetah. But what really happens is you might die and turn into a rat, a pig, or a fish. No one wants to die and become an animal that we consume as food as people. And if not by people, then other animals want to hunt you down. So the idea of becoming more heavenly being is more attractive. So to be honest with you, it makes more sense to think you become the human soul being afterwards. Furthermore, the afterlife is a place for all human souls because the physical being is still on earth buried. Let me ask you all a question. Does it really exist? Because there's not a real proof that it does. So does it exist? Now ask yourself a question. Does a place after we die exist? Because if you ask skeptics, they'll tell you there's no place we go after we die. There's no such thing called even a soul. We have a body that exists here on earth, and that is the once in our lives is over. That belief, of course, is not held by people who call themselves religious. Even people who don't call themselves spiritual don't believe that this life on earth is the final resting place. But there's one thing we all have to admit, and that is there's no afterlife proof. So until there is a proof, we still have to look at the afterlife as it is. But let's say for the sake of the episode for today that there is a soul. And if the soul does exist, where does the soul go off to once that happens? Well, I'll try my best to explain it here, which is where does the soul go off to? So let's say that the soul exists and it must go somewhere because we know what happens to the body. The body goes buried in the ground, but the collective of energy must go somewhere. There could be a collective of energy that rises and finds its way to the Earth's surface. Now, clearly I am speculating, but what if it did? Or better yet, how about energy getting passed on to the natural world? Could it be that our plant life thrives off the energy we leave behind? Wait a minute. That would mean that our energy is saved until we're buried. That doesn't make any sense. Something happens as we take our last breaths. Only person who knows what that feeling could potentially be would have to be the person dying. And no one is in a rush to experience that feeling. Let's for a second go back to the idea of a collective of energy. Furthermore, let's assume this energy has to be controlled and by someone or something. Who is that someone or something in control? Are we in control after we die? See, as we die, and let's assume for the sake of the episode, our souls leave the body. Are we in control still? Because we are in control on earth. But that doesn't mean control in the afterlife. Control implies that we have the psychological ability to govern ourselves. Yet in the case of death, there is no conscious mind. So once the conscious mind stops along with the body, then we cease to exist. In this case, the human afterlife would be out of our control. But just once, but just wait a second, because what is the soul? The soul is our rational, nutritional, and sensible selves, which means there is a conscious aspect to self. Now, our spirit is something we use to connect to God, and the spirit exists in our soul. So it could be possible to have an afterlife, but still, who's in control of that? Because even in this case, God still has control. So, in my opinion, we are not in control because our control is conscious. And when we die, the spirit and body separate, at which at this time, we now belong to God. Do we meet loved ones after we die? As for me, when we get to our final place, do we meet family? Now, this is yet another controversial statement to ask, simply because meeting family when the spirit is governed by God would mean no communication. Our communication is a form of interacting on earth. As we die and pass over into the afterlife, communication is limited. Even if we were to be able to come across them, we wouldn't recognize them simply because our spirit is something that identifies us. Recognizing others is mental action. If our spirit belongs to God, He'll be able to communicate. But wait, maybe God is able to communicate with your loved ones, then communicate to you via them. Then again, with so many people in the afterlife, does God speak to all? Or does God use His own help that assists Him in communicating with the dead? Yet, how does the all-seeing, all-knowing being need help? From my perspective, your soul and spirit is non-communicative. So meeting family in the afterlife becomes virtually impossible. See, I'm using my rational mind to make decisions. But we're not talking about psychology. We're trying to figure out if we can meet loved ones. Once again, that is a decision left up to God, which leads me into the next section. Who's in charge when we go to the afterlife? This section is the easiest to comprehend because the person who runs everything is God. Or maybe not. Do we truly know that God is in charge? God could have easily put together an entity in charge. That's right. God put together another entity that operates on His behalf. Yet why would He do that? Especially a God that is all-seeing and in charge of everything. Then again, who's to say there must be someone in charge? Our spirit could be free-flowing with no one governing it. So it's like I said earlier about a collection of energy that could also leave an open door to meeting loved ones in the afterlife. Maybe our spirit locates the spirit of family and we form a collection of energy together through the eternal life. This is something not only spiritual about, but also scientific. Now, you get an opportunity to hopefully be amongst loved ones. Here is a belief that could also fit into the last section regarding do we meet friends and family in the afterlife? So here we are with the science. What is the scientific proof? Now let's get into the practical arguments, the ones no one wants to discuss. The science behind all this holds up against the scrutiny it receives, meaning scientific perspective on afterlife is that our bodies shut down with the mind last to go. An example of this would be like shutting down a computer. Experiments have been conducted in order to see if there is a presence of a spirit leaving the body. Some have speculated that the body loses weight upon death, but more findings have later gone on to debunk these claims. So what are we left with but belief systems? And you can't base something so strong as an afterlife existence from just how you feel alone. The only way to find out is also coincidentally the way to never come back and tell people as well. In the future, will there be empirical evidence proving an afterlife? I hardly doubt it. But, and there is a but, even skeptics that are in the scientific community won't fully rule it out. They'll express their viewpoints from the perspective of we have no current data which shows that there's nor isn't an afterlife. Research leans closer to the afterlife non-existent, and the further facts will have to be presented to prove otherwise. This explanation is what scientists would present as an educated guess, one which opens the door for debate, yet standing firm on current information until something tangible is brought forth. How to deal with no afterlife. We die and nothing happens. I wonder how many people are prepared to deal with the inevitable. Your beliefs says something happens and nothing. But guess what? You'll never know to feel a certain way anyways. And I know that's hard to stomach, but how do you believe without the understanding that you could be wrong? Because there's more at stake for the believers than the skeptics, especially since you as a believer, your entire belief system depends on it. And I know the other side will say that the skeptics should be more concerned that they are wrong, but skeptics can afford to be wrong. Being wrong as a skeptic just means you often question the information that is presented to you. Fundamentalists will push back by saying they know they're right. The use of tangible information is not necessary and only exists to test the faith of the believer. So with this end statement, why we have to observe the possibility of an afterlife. I often think about where the spirit travels off to once we depart this earth because afterlife is one of intrigue and great debate. Fundamentalists have a hard time even wrapping their minds around the afterlife not being true. But scientists speculate about the afterlife, yet the skepticism should not be taken as resistance on the other side. I'm sure plenty of scientists would love proof of an afterlife, even if it were the collection of energy described earlier in this episode. So thank you for listening to In the Know, and I'll be bringing you another episode regarding religion. The topic will be asking the question, what is the reason for so much control that is needed to govern people under religion?